and welcome back to part 30 of Final Fantasy XII, where today, quite excitingly, we're finally taking on one particular hunt I've been looking forward to since pretty much the start of the project. And it's going to take up the whole video, so strap in for the next half an hour for the wildest adventure of your life.
Now we fight!
This is Gilgamesh, a reoccurring, not really villain, just a reoccurring fight across the whole series, and it's actually explained in the series as well how Gilgamesh keeps coming back. But I'll get into that in a second because there are some things I need to run by you. He does have a pet with him, his dog, lion thing, called Iduku. Iduku you need to take down first because it's just a problem and it has far less health than the main threat. Or Enkidu, sorry. But you'll see already, this doesn't take much to take the thing down. It only took a few swipes and it's already down. When you turn to the main Gilgamesh, the first thing you need to do, and you might have noticed I've already got it set up, stealing is going to be your main thing here. Every time a phase changes with what Gilgamesh is doing, you need to get everyone to try and steal from him again, because there is an elite group of armor called the Genji set that can only be obtained from him. And although the Genji set it doesn't have the greatest defense of all the armors in the game, it's not the best in the game, it does have some benefits and bonuses that will absolutely come in handy in select situations. And the Genji shield is pretty strong regardless of what your setup is going to be. Which is why you're seeing me now quickly race through and adjust everything. I have two Thief's Cuffs, but I didn't actually realise in the heat of this fight, so I didn't equip it. Eventually you'll notice the entire fight come to a standstill at select points. That's because a phase is about to shift, such as...
You face the mightiest swordsman in all evil East! You face me, Gilgamesh! Long have I sought the blade of legend. Scoured have I the furthest marches, east and west. And now my search brings me here, to you! Your weapons are forfeit to me!
I love Gilgamesh, seriously. Gilgamesh is the most enjoyable reoccurring character in the series. I say that he's technically the only one, it's just there are other characters that share the same name but they're different people. Like every game has a different character called Sid, or a different character called Biggs, and a different character called Wedge. But my point stands, Gilgamesh is hilarious. I've always enjoyed him, and the way they bring him back, now to go back onto it, now the basic strategy has been established. The reason why Gilgamesh keeps coming back is because in the original game that he starred in, I say starred in, was working for XII in, it was Final Fantasy V, near the end of the game he is thrown into the Void. And the Void is an interdimensional rift across every single universe in the Final Fantasy megaverse, I suppose. Because he's trapped in there, at random he will get thrown into different dimensions and different planets. So that's the way they justify him appearing in other Final Fantasy games. After his first appearance in 5, he's then appeared in 6, the remake of Final Fantasy 1, Final Fantasy 8, and then I think that was the last time until this game of Final Fantasy 12. Because this was the first time that he had a voice actor as well. And the voice for him is exactly how I thought he would sound when I was a kid. Like the ridiculous eccentricness, yet he genuinely thinks he's a serious threat. He genuinely thinks he is serious, so just goes, "You fight me, Gilgamesh!" And it's just like, yeah, alright Gilgamesh, take a chill, will ya? But I've been serious, genuinely, one of the biggest things that eventually convinced me to start this project was being able to talk about fighting Gilgamesh in a Final Fantasy game. Because after this, he returned in 13.2 as DLC, and then returned in 15 technically as DLC. But the version of him in 15, as you saw if you ever watched that Let's Play I did, is drastically different to the original Gilgamesh, to the point where it's an open discussion whether it's the same person or whether they've gone for the Sid approach where it's just a different person under the same name. I'd like to think it's the same one, but just like thousands of years later. Like, I could easily, at least to myself, explain the reason why he's got one arm is because the other 5 eventually got cut off. And he became more serious and cold and mentor-esque later on because of it. 'Cause I mean, keep in mind, in 15, he still has the people he defeats weapons become forfeit to him. He takes Kor's sword from his victory.
I fought worse.
Also, I love the references. I'm not going to spoil them for you. If you get them, you get them. But all of the weapons that he pulls out subtly hints at the fact that they're not the real version of that sword. Like, some of it, I say subtle. The first one we saw was a Buster sword that had a Japanese symbol on it, and the Japanese symbol just says fake. At some point, he's going to pull out Squall's gunblade, and instead of having the sigil on it, that's name slips my mind, it's like a chocobo chick on it instead. He has an ultimate attack that you just saw in action there, but if you keep everyone spaced out, it should only hit some of you, not all of you. The main thing about it is that every time he casts it, he will buff himself immediately afterwards, so you need to be on top of that. Once you've got your successful steal, you need to shift it over to just attacking until he pulls out a new weapon. You'll notice that you won't get the entire Genji set by the end of the fight, and you're going to see me, just to be sure, attempt to steal from Gilgamesh a lot more often than I ever needed to, because of it. As he readies his ultimate again. That's the only thing that can get a little time consuming with bosses using ultimates. That you'll eventually get to a point where, especially on the PS4 version where you can speed up the footage, the ultimates you wish you could skip. And it's even more baffling because there is a way to skip them in Final Fantasy X, yet you can't skip any of it in 12. In 10, there's an option where it's like ultimates or summons, full or short. And you could just, if you're not enjoying the fact that it does this big long 20-second animation every time, you could set it to short. In 12, there's no such option. Yes, no ultimate or summon takes anywhere near as long as how they did in 10, but it still would have been nice to be able to shrink it down the way you could in the original. But at this point, there is nothing left for us to steal from Gilgamesh, so I let Barsh join into the fight again. And I think that's the main thing that might catch you off and why you might want to be a little bit stronger than I am if you're trying to make sure to get everything. If you're not feeling so daring, you are going to want to steal everything, but you can't just have the whole party attack Gilgamesh relentlessly. So you're going to have potentially one member, if they don't have steal, just sitting around on healing duty if you want to alter their gambits, or just turning off their gambits and controlling them manually for the whole fight, which is what you're kind of seeing in this fight. You have to excuse the odd pauses. I've got a bottle of water in my lap, so I'm just kind of drinking as I go along because my throat's got a little dry as well. But if you're sitting there wondering, well, hang on a minute, Rob. If this boss is the entire video, and the video is 34 minutes long, how come this boss is nearly dead in 8 minutes? Well, that's because there's 2 fights, and we're doing both of them today. There's 2 fights against Gilgamesh. Once you defeat this first bar, he'll run away to a second location, and we'll chase him to there. This first location, as mentioned previously, is just after the save point in the Lusu Mines. So if you've unlocked the second section of it, as in you've gone to do the Antlion quest, you can then access this. But if you wish to access the second half of this fight, you do need to get into the 3rd district of the Lusu Mines, meaning you need to have finished the Antlion quest and gone to pick up the key at the Fire Coast. But once you defeat this first phase, his trusty dog thing will return and he'll run away laughing. If you kill Gilgamesh first and leave the dog alive, that cutscene will be slightly different. He won't turn around to look for Enkidu. Enkidu will just be there and will jump with him. And it's the same for the second fight that we'll be doing in a little bit. If depending on whether Enkidu's alive or dead, depends on how the cutscene plays out. Not that it matters that much, because the game doesn't count it for any kind of completion. It's not like Death End Request, when we played that at the end of last year, where that game it recorded what cutscenes you had seen and would reward you for seeing more optional scenes. That doesn't exist in this. That's just Death End's weird thing. So that's a topic point. Death End Request 2 is supposed to come out this year in the West, but I've got a sneaking suspicion Idea Factory International are mostly working from home now because of the ongoing threat of you know what. I gotta be careful because I've genuinely seen YouTube videos get pulled down for mentioning it because YouTube are hot on potential false news going around. And so I can kind of get it, as for annoying as it is, but because they're so hot on potential false news going around, any use of that word can result in your video getting shut down. And so for future reference, it's just, I'll either refer to it as the thing or you know what. But because of you know what, I can imagine they're working from home, and I can imagine that is going to eventually delay a lot of the work done in the translation. Like, yes, I know some of the translation work. Like, I know the returning cast, a lot of the cast there do their performance work at home with their own mics, so that shouldn't be too bad anyway. It'll be business as usual. But I know Erica Harlander, I think that's her last name. I might be completely wrong, and I'm sorry if I've butchered that name, but I know she does it in a studio, so I think that there might be the odd stumbles and issues along the way. But either way, whenever Death End 2 eventually comes out, I will be doing it on the channel, just because I think I owe it to you guys after pulling you through the whole first game. Off screen, between encounters, just in case you're following along and I'm just about to dive into this fight, I mentioned last parts that Gilgamesh has an attack that only targets you if you're in a multiple of 2 on your levels, an attack if it's a multiple of 3, and an attack if it's a multiple of 4. This is now the fight where that is in effect, and so between the encounters I grinded for a little bit to get everyone to level 53, because 53 isn't a multiple of 2, 3 or 4. So now all of his level based attacks will not connect with any of the party. The main thing to warn you of this second fight, and the reason why it's the rest of this video, is that he is about 7 or 8 levels stronger, and that ends up doing wonders for his stats and making him a much more brutal encounter. But similar to the strategy is pretty much the same as the first phase. You just might be healing more often and be prepared to burn through a couple ethers along the way. You need to deal with his dog first and then worry about Gilgamesh later on. But even Enkidu has been leveled up a little bit as well, so you need to be wary that the dog's not going to fall down straight away. And you're going to see me start doing quite, like, trying to go more out of my way with the gambits, like making it so Ash will always target Enkidu first. And then later on I try and make it so, like, the steel will automatically override. It doesn't work, but I just try and experiment a little bit. I think I even mess with Balfir's gambits a little bit as well, just so I can give him more magic access. Because although he still has less than 500 MP, Scathe is an amazing spell to get. And even if you didn't follow along, if you're about to fight Gilgamesh, Scathe is literally at the save point outside of this second phase. There is no excuse to not have it. But there is no, you could have done it in a different order and just happened to not find it. It's literally outside the door to this room. You'd have to deliberately ignore it to not have it. So if you can get the MP together, more so if you stacked up on ethers, go wild with it if need be. Like, put it over the attack command if you want, but just use it. It is your friend. It is tier 4 non-elemental magic, so it will always hit. And to be honest, I should have put it on right from the start, because it's also it got a wide effect, so it would have hit both of them. So I could get some damage done on Gilgamesh whilst at the same time hurting the dog. But I just didn't think that far ahead. Those kinds of elite strategies didn't come to me till later in my recording sessions. Which, speaking of, Final Fantasy XII is now 100% completely recorded. The only thing I couldn't show was the invisible weapons, because this is me and my luck just wasn't playing ball, and so I just never got the odds to stack in my favour to get it. Which is a shame, because I actually spent a fair amount of time trying to get it. There was a point where I was spending at least an hour a day trying to get the blinking thing, and it just never happened. And eventually I was like, you know what, I've spoken about it enough. If you want to get it, absolutely go for it. There's 1,000,001 videos online. There's 1,000,001 guides online for you to try and manipulate the RNG to boost your chances. There's so many little things you can do if you want to try and go for it. You can go for it, because I've tried and I've gotten nowhere. If any of you do get it, I'm going to be watching this. I'd love to know what one you managed to get. Whether you got the sword in a certain dungeon later on, whether you got the shield, which I think is on, I want to say one of the beaches, but I'd have to double check, or whether you got the bow on top of the leisure cruising ship. Which, like I said, the bow's the strongest one. of the 3, which is bizarre because it's the easiest one to get because there's no enemies. It's not in a dangerous environment. There's no potential of any threats outside of a hunt later on if you decide to accept it, so you can just not if you don't want to. You just literally go up to any like airport in Ivalice, go into it, click on any of the staff talking around saying I'd like to go to wherever one you click on, pay the basic fine of like 100 gil, and make sure to pick leisure instead of private. If you pick private, you just go straight there. You pick leisure, you get to roam around the airship, and then you're literally just going up to the upper decks. The stairs are easy to find, you're up there in a heartbeat, and you're literally just going up to the top deck, following the stairs to the top, running in a straight line into the back wall. Did you run into something invisible? No? Go back through the door, back through it, up the stairs again. When you run into something invisible, rub up against it, press the interact button, you'll open it, and there's a 1% chance of it being the bow. Or 5% if you've got the diamond armlet equipped, but despite that I managed to find, I think it was 17 of the invisible chests I opened in the end, and I didn't get it once, so I eventually just, you know what, I'm going to be here for the rest of my naturals if I try and continue to get this. You might have noticed, Enkidu's still alive! Despite the fact I've got the whole party pushing on the thing. That's what I mean by a little bit of level difference can sometimes make the difference. Enkidu's still around, and Gilgamesh every now and then will buff it, which is why you're seeing things like Fly Enkidu, or Yada Yada Enkidu, or Attack Enkidu. He is ordering the dog, and because he's ordering it, the dog's getting odd buffs here and there. And the buffs seem to kinda stack, making this last sort of glimmer of health more annoying. Throughout the fight, I also burned through any and all elixirs I might have, which, if you're following along, obviously try not to do that because there's only so many elixirs and mega elixirs in this game. But because I'm just that kind of player, like if it's not the classic like 7 or 8 games, I'm usually pretty free in how I use my elixirs. And I think the fact that we've put all this effort in the past, what, 7 or 8 minutes in trying to take down the dog. Look at Gilgamesh's health bar, the boss bar at the top of the screen. I've yet to attack him once, because we're just trying to get rid of his blinking dog so he can actually focus on the main threat, which finally worked out. So now we're actually starting the fight for Gilgamesh, and we've got 15 minutes left of the video. So now you go see, I'm going to change all of the gambits of the party to make sure that they're working in my best interest to get through this fight, and we finally turn on Gilgamesh himself as the ever amazing theme of Gilgamesh, Clash on the Big Bridge, continues to play in the background. A theme that I've never not loved. Whether it's the original version of 5, whether it's the PS1 port of 5 that had a slightly altered version of all the tracks just because of the different sound engines. Seriously, if you can, listen to the PS1 version of Clash on the Big Bridge. It's actually pretty solid. The version that played on the PSP remake of Final Fantasy 1. I don't think there was a version that played in 8, but my memory of 8 is sparse because I don't really enjoy that game that much. The orchestral mix in this one, the more cultural version that they give him in 13.2, which is my personal favourite, and the more impactful and serious version he gets in 15. And that's ignoring all the versions that play when he appears in spin-offs like World of Final Fantasy. Or the Rhythm game, or you know what I mean. All the versions of Clash on the Big Bridge I love. It is one of those tracks that I think absolutely deserves all the praise it gets and absolutely deserves its place as a mainstay Final Fantasy theme. Like to a point where it kind of feels weird playing a Final Fantasy game that doesn't have this track in there anymore. Like I've been mentioning it to like some of my family and such, that one of the things I'd love to see in the next Final Fantasy game is some of the traditional music to come back, because I feel like that's been missing for way too long. When Final Fantasy 16 eventually does come out, I want to fire up the game and the first thing I hear is Prelude. You know the you know that. I'd love to hear that, because in all of the original Final Fantasies going up to 7, I want to say, every fight started with the every fight for game started with the Prelude. Just because Gilgamesh said fight, it threw me off. Also, I want the battle theme to start the old-fashioned way that it did in the first 6 and 9, and then none others. Because the fact that they brought it back in 9, and 9 was supposed to be a blast from the past kind of Final Fantasy, kind of highlighted that, yeah, it was a traditional mainstay and should have come back. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you fire up any battle theme from the first 6 or 9, all of them will start up with and then go into their melody. All of them did that. And then 7 decided to break the trend because it was to jump to 3D, and we let it off for that. 8 was trying to be different from the rest of the series because it knew it couldn't compete with the sheer unrelenting success of 7, so we let it off. But when they brought it back in 9, it should have stayed. It should have brought it back in 10. It should have done the startup and then the but it didn't. 12 doesn't have a battle theme or normal battle theme because it's more open-ended. And 13.1's battle theme is just better left unsaid. 13.2's pretty good, but still was missing it. And they didn't even bring it back for 15, which they could have done. I really wanted them to bring it back for 15, they just never did it. I want the old victory fanfare, because after this game, it was the last time we heard the victory fanfare until 15. Throughout the entire 13 trilogy, we didn't hear the original victory fanfare once, which was just insane. Also, here's Gilgamesh's new special. He has 2 that he's going to use. That's one of them, and it's pretty much guaranteed to be an instant kill on whoever it hits, but it only ever seems to hit one person. So I guess that's the trade-off. You're just prepared to burn through a raise or a phoenix down every time. The other track I want to see come back is the original anthem of Final Fantasy. One thing of the things that I really enjoy about 12 is that they did bring it back. It is in this game. It plays on the title screen. It played during very important cutscenes, like between acts. When we finished the prologue, it played when it was explaining about Ash was going to the Tomb of Wraithfall. It played again when we just cleared Act 2, just entering into Act 3 a couple parts ago. The original anthem of Final Fantasy, the name itself is self-explanatory why it should come back, but it used to be slotted in quite cleverly into the credits of all the classic Final Fantasies. They would have their own melody that would represent the game, but then it would transition into the Final Fantasy anthem near the end to really sell it home, the adventure you've just been on. The biggest example I always give is the genuinely fantastic ending theme of Final Fantasy VI. As much as I give 6 a bit of flack and say that I think, because I do feel it is a teeny tad overrated in places, and especially the second half of the game can kind of drag on, the soundtrack for 6 is god tier, and the actual ending theme, the 22-minute long ending theme, is so magnificent and amazing, and it hurts my soul that we've never got a full orchestrated version of the full 22-minute theme in any of the Distant World concerts. They've done like a 6-minute abstract, and they've also done the anthem of Final Fantasy at some point, but they've never done the whole 22 minutes, and it's like, go on. Even if it's the only track you do it, come on. But that is a perfect example of what I mean, because it did 20 odd minutes straight of going over all 14 of the playable characters in that game, going over all of their themes, all their quirks in the melody, in this really beautiful synthesized orchestrated form, for it to then gradually just go into the second best sounding version of the anthem of Final Fantasy, in my opinion. It was mesmerizing. It did wonders for making the rest of the journey you've just got on feel better. Also, we just saw the Genji helm, and I've already just realised that the armour we got on is a little better. The armour you can find in Lucy Mines Part 3 is kind of better if you're a heavy armour user, but the Genji armour is available to pretty much every job. So if you've got a job set that only uses light armor and you really want them to be in heavy armor, the Genji set is going to be in your favor. It just costs a lot of license points to get a hold of, as he uses Bitter End a second time, taking out Balthier again. It's always Balthier he targets, and Balthier is like the least threatening one. Like, Barsh has got an axe that he's swinging at him, and Ash can heal. And heal effectively. Like, I think your priorities are a bit out of whack, Gilgamesh. But you're also noticing that Gilgamesh's defense is a lot higher. That health bar is not moving anywhere near as high as it is. If you decide against grinding because you don't fancy it, and so you end up with a multiple of the levels, just make sure it's not an even number at least. Because getting put to sleep every other turn will only play havoc with your party. Like, Break you can deal with because it's petrification, so you can just get past it afterwards. And the level 4 multiple one, if you're multiple of 4, I just feel sorry for you, because that is going to end your fight almost immediately. Hey, it finally hit someone who can survive that attack. It hit Bash, and Bash has got close to over 10,000 health now. You're even going to see me make some like sudden adjustments, like checking everything as I go, because I really wanted to make sure I could get this this boss fight done now. I didn't want to leave it till later, because I knew after the next plot section, the amount of levels you're likely to gain in the next plot area, which is Guravegan, we would be way too powerful for this fight on the other side. At least I feel we would. So I wanted to do it now, and you're going to see me kind of flicking word for it at trying to get through to it. But we are getting to a point where now he's going to pull out his ultimate weapon, which is kind of funny to see in my opinion, but here it is.
Quake, mortals! You face the Blade of Legend!
The Blade of Legend that he just pulled out, just like all the other swords, is fake. What he believes he is holding is Excalibur. What he's actually holding is Excalibur. I kid you not. It's a slightly different wording on it, but it is not the real Excalibur. We'll be getting Excalibur later on. It's Excalibur, which is a play on the fact that in every Final Fantasy game he picks up a different Blade of Legend that he thinks is called Excalibur, but is actually a slightly different spelling. It's usually Excalibur that he picks up. But once he has pulled out this ultimate weapon, he will now use his second new ultimate, Monarch Sword. Monarch Sword is kind of terrifying. All jokes aside, Monarch Sword is pretty brutal, and he will use this a lot. And you're going to see, even though it's not as strong, it was pretty effective at just wiping the floor with you. But once you steal the Genji armor from him, that should be the last thing that you can steal from him. Because the only thing you're missing from the Genji set is Excalibur, and Excalibur is your reward for clearing this hunt, because he is technically classed as an elite hunt. Originally you didn't, you got Excalibur elsewhere. Originally when you beat him, your reward was the Master Mune, which is the reward that we got for even entering this arena when we explored here earlier. It's just sitting in a chest now in the Zodiac Age version of the game. So instead your reward is Excalibur. And Excalibur it's extremely fitting of a reward. I'll mention it more when we get to it, but it's funny. I just can't help but grin. I almost, one of these days, in one of the Final Fantasies where you can get Excalibur/Excalibur, I'm going to do a run where I try and get it as soon as possible and then equip it on the main character and then just run with it for the rest of the game. Because it actually has a pretty decent hit rate. It's just the rest of it is terrible. You're essentially hitting someone with rubber is the problem. Unless of course you're Gilgamesh, in which case for some reason it hits. Also, I was tempted to keep in the entirety of this special, because it was actually the longest chain I'd ever gotten, which is why I get Black Hole on the other end of it. It was a chain of 16, I think, which was insane, but I wanted to keep the whole thing in because I wanted to show you that it wasn't enough to kill him. Despite the fact it was a chain of 16 and Black Hole on the end, it wasn't enough to do him in. And now for the rest of, I say the rest of, for the next 2 minutes or so, it's just survival. It's just try and get that last glimmer down of him. And you're going to see me on occasion use steel just to double check I've got everything as we near the end of the fight. But I have. I said the only thing you should be missing at this point is Excalibur, but that is the reward for beating this hunt, so just defeat him as he readies Monarch Sword again. And you're seeing me hard push as well now. That you see me like manually try and get people to attack. It's like, no, this Gilgamesh needs to be defeated now because this fight's nearly half an hour long. Well, both phases together, the fights become nearly half an hour long. But this is why yesterday's video was kind of on the shorter side, because yeah, this guy is this entire part, and he's not the only boss fight in this game that's going to be an entire part. But the rest of them, I believe, are super bosses. I'd have to double check what I've edited together, but I'm pretty sure the rest of them that are full parts are super bosses. That being the Hellworm and then Yzmat on the other end of everything. Oh, as Barsh gets knocked down. I always kind of... Look, my heart always skips a beat when it's Barsh that goes down, just because he has the highest defense and highest health. So if he goes down, it absolutely means the other two can. But then sometimes you do always just get unlucky that the enemy will only target your tank. And it's like, although it's helpful that it targets your tank so the other two can get work done, sometimes they over-target and you end up in trouble. It was Bravely Default that used to give me the most trouble with it, where sometimes the enemy would just decide your tank has to die. And it's like, yeah, as much as I get it, like, stop. The Bravely Default duology, I would love to cover someday. I love Bravely Default and Bravely Second for different reasons. And Bravely Default 11, because I think that is what's going to be the trick of. Bravely Default 2, that's supposed to be coming out on the Switch, the Bravely Default series always has really cryptic conspiracy theorist level messages hidden in their title screen. I am all but certain it's not Bravely Default 2, it's Bravely Default 11, because there's going to be 11 main characters. Because you got the 4 from the original, the 4 from the new one, and the 3 extras, because I'm counting Altair, because Altair was the reason why Tiz was even alive. Altair was in his body, keeping his spirit alive. So he is a main character. The entire plot revolves around Altair's journey and his quest and what he failed to do. So he is absolutely a main character. So adding them all up together, 4, 4, and 3, that's 11. But now I've done doing my conspiracy theorying for a game that isn't Final Fantasy. Gilgamesh is defeated. And your reward for doing so is that they will run away again. But you'll see him leave Excalibur behind, and you'll think, oh, I can just pick it up here. No, you can't, because it's not the actual Blade of Legend. Like, the game, like, this is the point where the game will give it away to you. If you interact with the sword, it will say it's just a regular Blade of Legend. Like, it will just tell you there's nothing special about this so-called Blade of Legend. But Gilgamesh has been vanquished. He hasn't, he's just retreated. And we'll next see him in the series, I believe, in 13-2. Where he shows up with 6 guns instead, and then partway through the fight says, no, guns are no fun, and then just throws them all away, making a genuinely stunned look on both Sarah and Noel's face. Yeah, it appears to be an ordinary Blade of Legend. Before he whips out another new 6 swords. But these are the stats and the equipment I had. Like I said, everyone was level 53, just saying they wasn't a multiple of anything. But when you go to leave, you get another little cheeky cutscene of Gilgamesh coming back. Seriously, finding out that Final Fantasy XII went through development hell and was a rushed project still baffles me, because there's so many little details. Like Gilgamesh coming back for his sword. It's brilliant. But I now decided to... But now that's pretty much it for the rest of this part. So I'm turning in the Begamnon hunt we did last part and the Gilgamesh hunt we did just now to get our rewards for doing so. The nameless swordsman was Gilgamesh. And we get 10,000 gil and Excalibur. Let's look at Excalibur's stats, shall we? Let's look at them together. Ooh. Anyway, next time on Final Fantasy XII, we'll be going back to the plot as we journey to Guravagan. But until then, take care now.